The U.S. economy had a robust end to 2023, with the gross domestic product exceeding expectations. The Commerce Department reports GDP rose by 3.3% in the fourth quarter. That's compared to just over 2.5% in the final 3 months of 2022. GDP measures the monetary value of all goods and services. Overall, these latest numbers show Americans are spending and investing more as inflation cools. For more on this, let's bring in Neil Irwin. He's the chief economic correspondent for Axios. Neil, the GDP report exceeded those projections for the past quarter. What were economists expecting, and why do we think these numbers were so high?
So the consensus forecast was 2% GDP growth in the fourth quarter. We got 3.3, as you said. That's a big overshoot. We also had a really strong third quarter number. So the second half of 2023, we saw just extremely robust economic growth in the U.S., despite all the recession warnings, all the concerns, all the, even layoffs in some sectors, some industries. This is a U.S. economy that has proven strikingly robust over and over again, strikingly resilient, even as there's been some challenges and a lot of things that might go wrong just quite haven't.
There was a time when if you said that the U.S. was not in recession, you'd be called a fool. That recession never came, which leads me to my question about the Fed. It's got to figure out where this economy is going. It's holding its first meeting of the year soon. What can we expect from the Fed, and how do you put this number in the context of what the Federal Reserve has been trying to do?
Yeah, so if you go back a year and a half, Federal Reserve was raising interest rates very aggressively, as they have in decades, to try to bring down inflation. And, they thought along the way that they were going to have to cause maybe not a recession, but certainly a downturn and elevated unemployment. They were going to have to cause some pain to get that. And it's not that there's no pain and there's nothing that's gone wrong, but we haven't had that. We've had inflation come down even as the economy's stayed basically sound and the unemployment rate stayed quite low. Now the Federal Reserve has to decide what to do. Are they going to cut rates as it looks like inflation is mostly, down back to normal, close to it at least? And that's what markets are expecting. Maybe not this week, this meeting coming up next week, maybe as soon as March, if not in March, later in the year. That's what Fed officials themselves think, that it's time for rate cuts. They're time to adjust the other way. That said, when you're getting 3.3% economic growth, that's kind of an unusual thing to say, given that inflation still hasn't come all the way down to that 2% rate that the Fed is targeting.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you about rent in the United States. So prices are dropping slightly at the end of 2023, but rent still is up and is high. And people talk about that a lot when we talk about the overall inflation picture. Why are rents so high?
The fundamental thing with rents is you have a supply and demand imbalance in the United States. There's, a lot of people looking for housing. Supply has not kept up in a lot of the major markets where the jobs are. And so you had this upward pressure on rents over and above normal inflation in a lot of major markets for a lot of years. And look, there's some signs in the private sector data that maybe that's receding, and maybe, new leases aren't rising as fast as they were. But that said, for people who have have leases that are already in place, they're not coming down, and rents aren't really easing, aren't really reducing. The problem is, we talk about these macroeconomic things of inflation and interest rates and GDP and overall growth. That doesn't solve things if people aren't building housing. And if communities are not allowing housing to be built, you're not going to get the supply needed to satiate demand for housing.
And so that's really the question. That's the point about bringing down these prices. There just has to be more supply. There has to be more physical places for people to rent.
Yeah, there are macroeconomic problems and microeconomic. The housing shortage in America is a microeconomic problem tied to all kinds of zoning policies and things that apply in every different locality.
Not something that could be fixed with the waving of a wand. Neil Irwin with Axios. Thanks so much, Neil.
Thanks, John.